Sure. Here's a compelling introduction for your YouTube video story. The courtroom was silent, tension hanging thick in the air. A bitter custody battle was unfolding before the judge. A battle between two parents who once promised to love their son, but now stood on opposite sides, each fighting to prove they were the better choice. At the center of it all was a 10-year-old boy, small in stature, but holding a truth bigger than anyone could have imagined. His parents had spent months slinging accusations, hiring the best lawyers, and presenting arguments meant to tear each other down. His mother claimed his father was unfit. His father insisted his mother was manipulative. The attorneys spoke for them, their voices echoing through the courtroom, but no one had asked the boy what he wanted. No one had expected him to speak, until he did. As the judge prepared to make the final ruling, the boy suddenly stood up. His voice, though young, carried a weight that demanded attention. The attorneys paused. His parents turned to him in shock. The judge raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What could a child possibly say in this moment? But when he spoke, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. He didn't plead for one parent over the other. He didn't cry or hesitate. Instead, he revealed something so unexpected, so raw that even the judge, a man who had seen hundreds of cases, was left stunned. His words didn't just change the course of the custody battle. They changed everything. What did he say? And how did his truth turn this entire case upside down? Stay with us, because this is a twist you won't forget. The room was frozen in silence, all eyes locked on the young boy standing in the middle of the courtroom. His small hands trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady. He had spent so many nights lying awake, listening to his parents argue through the walls, feeling like a prize to be won rather than a child to be loved. But today he was done staying quiet. The judge leaned forward, intrigued. The lawyers exchanged glances, unsure of what to expect. His parents, who had spent months arguing about what was best for him, suddenly looked nervous. They had been so focused on proving each other wrong that they never stopped to think about what their son truly felt. Taking a deep breath, the boy looked directly at the judge. "You've all been talking about me," he said, his voice clear and deliberate. "But no one has asked me what I want." His father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His mother's eyes widened, as if realizing for the first time that he had a voice of his own. The judge nodded, signaling for him to continue. The boy swallowed hard. He had rehearsed this moment in his head over and over, but now that it was here, the words felt heavier. He glanced between his parents, searching their faces for understanding, for love, for something that told him they still remembered who they were before everything fell apart. Finally, he spoke again, his next words sending a wave of shock through the courtroom. "I know something," he said slowly. "Something neither of you have told the judge, but I think he should know." A hushed murmur rippled through the room. His parents exchanged anxious looks. The judge studied him carefully, sensing that whatever this boy was about to say could change everything. But before he could continue, his mother suddenly stood up, her face pale. "Sweetheart, let's talk about this at home," she said quickly, forcing a smile. The boy shook his head. He wasn't backing down now, not after everything he had been through. The judge raised a hand, silencing the room. "Let the boy speak," he said firmly. The boy took another deep breath. He was about to reveal something that no one in that courtroom saw coming. The air in the courtroom felt thick, charged with an energy no one could quite explain. The boy's mother shifted uneasily in her seat, stealing nervous glances at his father. His father, usually so confident, now looked unsure, his jaw tightening as if bracing for something unexpected. The judge watched closely, waiting. The boy's heart pounded, but he didn't let it stop him. He had spent too long feeling invisible in this battle, like a piece of paper being passed back and forth between two people who barely saw him anymore. But he had seen things, heard things, and now for the first time he was going to make sure everyone else did too. He turned to his father first. "You always say Mom doesn't care about me," he said. His voice wasn't angry, just tired. "But I've seen you say things about her that aren't true. You make her sound like a bad person when I know she's not." His father's face hardened, but before he could say anything, the boy turned to his mother. "And you say Dad only wants to win, that he doesn't really love me. But that's not true either." He swallowed. "I know because I hear him at night when he thinks no one is listening. He worries about me. He talks about me like I'm the most important thing in the world." A heavy silence followed his words. The courtroom wasn't used to this. A child cutting through the layers of arguments and accusations with simple, undeniable truths. His parents exchanged glances, something unspoken passing between them. For months, their fight had been about control, about proving the other wrong. But now, sitting here, listening to their son, they were being forced to see the damage they had done. The boy wasn't finished. He clenched his fists, gathering the courage to say the part that had been weighing on him the most. "But that's not even the biggest thing," he added, his voice quieter now. The judge leaned forward. "Go on," he encouraged. The boy hesitated, looking down at his shoes. He had debated whether to say this out loud, whether the truth was too much. But deep down, he knew he had no choice. If he didn't say it now, no one ever would. Lifting his head, he met his parents' eyes. "There's something you both don't know," he whispered. His mother stiffened. His father's breath caught. The judge's gaze sharpened. The entire courtroom seemed to lean in, waiting. The courtroom felt colder now, as if the weight of the boy's words had shifted the very air around them. His mother sat frozen, her eyes darting between him and the judge. His father gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. No one spoke. No one moved. All eyes were on the child who had just hinted at a truth no one saw coming. The boy took a shaky breath, forcing himself to stay strong. He had spent too long carrying this secret, too long waiting for the right moment to speak up. And now, with both his parents watching, the judge listening, and the entire courtroom hanging on his every word, he knew there was no turning back. His voice was softer this time, but no less powerful. "I know why you're really fighting," he said. His mother opened her mouth as if to interrupt, but the judge shot her a warning look. His father's jaw tightened, his eyes dark with something unreadable. The boy continued. "You're not just fighting over me," he said, his voice steady now. "You're fighting because you don't want me to know the truth." A hushed murmur rippled through the courtroom. His mother's hands clenched in her lap. His father shifted uncomfortably, eyes flickering toward his ex-wife. It was the first time they weren't glaring at each other, but instead, avoiding something. The boy saw it. He saw the way they suddenly seemed more afraid of what he might say than of losing the case. And that's when he knew he wasn't wrong. His chest tightened, but he pushed forward. "I heard you both talking," he admitted. "Late at night, on the phone, when you thought I was asleep." His mother's face went pale. His father's eyes widened, just for a second, before he mastered the cough. The boy knew they would try to cover it up, explain it away, say he misunderstood. But he hadn't. His voice wavered slightly, but he forced himself to keep going. "You're hiding something from me. From everyone." His gaze locked onto both of them. "And I want to know what it is." The judge's expression turned serious. "Is this true?" he asked, looking between the two parents. Neither of them answered. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. The boy could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He had never seen his parents like this, speechless, caught off guard, afraid. Then his mother let out a shaky breath. "Sweetheart," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand." But the boy shook his head. "No," he said firmly, "I do." His father rubbed his temples, looking like he wanted to be anywhere but here. "This isn't the place," he muttered. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, bringing order back to the room. "I disagree," he said. "If this boy has something to say and it pertains to this case, then this is exactly the place." The boy took one last breath, steadying himself. He was about to expose the truth that neither of his parents wanted to admit. And when he did, nothing would ever be the same again. The room was so quiet that the boy could hear his own heartbeat thudding in his ears. His parents sat frozen, caught between fear and denial, but he wasn't going to stop now. Not after coming this far. He turned to the judge, his small hands gripping the sides of his chair. "I know you think this is just about who I should live with," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But it's not. It's about what they don't want anyone to know." The judge studied him carefully, his expression unreadable. "Go on," he encouraged. The boy hesitated for just a moment, then let the truth slip from his lips. "They have been working together this whole time," he said, "pretending to fight, pretending they hate each other." A wave of confusion rippled through the room. His parents stiffened. The attorneys exchanged bewildered glances. Even the judge's usually composed expression faltered for a second. His father was the first to react. "That's ridiculous," he scoffed, but there was an uneasiness in his tone. "Why would we?" The boy cut him off. "Because they don't want anyone to find out what they did," he said, his voice rising slightly. "I heard them. They were arguing about keeping it a secret." His mother's lips parted, but no words came out. Her face had lost all its color. The judge folded his hands, his gaze sharp. "And what secret is that?" The boy swallowed hard. He had been piecing it together for months, but now saying it out loud made it feel even bigger, even scarier. "Something happened before they split up," he said. "Something bad." His parents exchanged a glance, quick but telling. There was fear there, real fear. His heart pounded as he turned to them. "If I'm wrong," he challenged, "then why are you both so scared right now?" His father clenched his jaw, his mother let out a shaky breath, but neither of them denied it. The judge's voice cut through the tension. "I suggest you start talking," he said, directing his gaze at the parents now. But before either of them could say a word, the courtroom doors suddenly swung open. A man walked in, his expression unreadable, his eyes locked on the boy's parents. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a relative. But the moment they saw him, everything changed. His mother gasped. His father shot up from his chair as if he had just seen a ghost. And the boy? He just sat there, watching, waiting, because he knew, in that moment, that the truth was about to come out whether they liked it or not. The entire courtroom felt like it had frozen in time. The man who had just walked in didn't say a word, but his presence alone sent shockwaves through the room. The boy's mother covered her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. His father stood rigid, his face drained of color. The judge glanced between them, clearly sensing the shift. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The man took a slow step forward. "My name is Daniel Carter," he said, his voice steady, "and I have information that changes everything." The boy sat perfectly still, his heart racing. He didn't recognize this man, but something told him he was the missing piece in all of this. His father finally found his voice. "You're not supposed to be here," he muttered under his breath, but it was loud enough for the judge to hear. The judge's gaze sharpened. "That's not for you to decide," he said. He turned to the man. "Go on." Daniel nodded and turned his attention back to the boy. His eyes softened. "Your parents have been keeping something from you," he said carefully. "Something they thought would never come out." He took a deep breath. "I know, because I was part of it." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. The boy's stomach twisted with a mix of fear and anticipation. His mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please," she said, "don't do this." But Daniel ignored her. 10 years ago, before you were even born," he said, "your parents were involved in a legal case, one that should have sent them both to prison." He glanced at the judge. "But somehow, they covered it up." The boy's breath caught in his throat. "What did they do?" he asked. Daniel hesitated, then looked him straight in the eye. "They took something that wasn't theirs," he said, "and they built their lives on that lie." The courtroom erupted. Lawyers whispered frantically, reporters scribbled notes, and the judge banged his gavel for order. The boy turned to his parents, searching their faces for the truth. His father refused to meet his gaze. His mother had tears in her eyes. "I don't understand," the boy whispered. "What did you take?" His mother let out a shaky breath. "You," she admitted. Silence. The boy's entire world seemed to tilt. His chest tightened. His hands clenched into fists. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely audible. His father finally spoke, his voice raw with emotion. "You weren't supposed to be ours," he said, "but we couldn't let you go." The room spun around the boy. Everything, every fight, every lie, every secret, made sense now. His whole life had been built on something false. The judge's voice cut through the chaos. "We need to get to the bottom of this," he said. "Now." But the boy already knew. He wasn't who he thought he was, and neither were the people who had raised him. The boy sat there, his entire world unraveling in front of him. His parents, no, the people he had always called his parents, refused to look at him. The weight of their confession pressed down on him like a storm he couldn't escape. He had come here thinking this was just another custody battle, but now everything felt different. Everything felt wrong. The judge took a deep breath, his voice steady but firm. "I need the full truth," he said, looking directly at the boy's parents. "Now." His mother wiped her tears, her hands shaking. "We never meant to hurt him," she whispered. We fell in love with him." His father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "It was complicated," he admitted. "There was a legal mix-up, a mistake no one caught in time, and when we realized it, we couldn't let him go." The boy felt his chest tighten. "So you just decided to keep me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His mother reached for him, but he pulled away. "You were ours in every way that mattered," she said desperately. "We raised you, we love you." "But you lied," the boy interrupted. "You lied to me my whole life." His father's head dropped, guilt heavy in his expression. "We thought we were protecting you," he said. The judge turned to Daniel. "And how do you fit into this?" Daniel exhaled. "I was the one trying to fix the mistake," he admitted. "I was working on the case when it was covered up. I didn't know where he ended up until recently." He turned back to the boy. "You were never supposed to be with them." The words sent a shiver down the boy's spine. He looked around the courtroom, at the lawyers, the reporters scribbling furiously, the strangers watching like they were witnessing something unbelievable. But to him, this wasn't just some dramatic twist. This was his life. The judge straightened, his decision clear in his eyes. "We will be reviewing every legal document related to this case," he said. "And until we determine the next steps, custody arrangements will be reconsidered." The boy barely heard the words. His mind was spinning, his heart pounding. Everything was changing. He didn't even know who he was anymore. His mother tried again. "Sweetheart, please," she whispered. "We love you." The boy looked at her, then at his father. He saw the fear, the regret, the love. But love wasn't supposed to come with lies. For the first time in his life, he had a choice. And for the first time, he wasn't sure what he wanted. As he stood up, the entire courtroom watched, waiting to see what he would do. But he didn't have the answers yet. He only knew one thing: nothing would ever be the same again.